Okay, I'm going to show you a video that's related to my presentation. It's a short video, about a minute long, and probably many of you have already seen it. So let me play it, and then I can tell you how it's related to my presentation.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? The Great Depression, passed the, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone raised or lowered? Raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is, class? Anyone? Anyone? Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point on the revenue curve, you will get exactly the same amount of revenue as at this point. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
That clip is from a movie that probably many of you saw, and I'm going to explain how it relates to differentiated learning in just a few seconds. I did some research on differentiated learning and had a paper, a peer-reviewed paper that was accepted and is going to appear in a journal called The Clearinghouse, I hope in a few months, and I'm going to share with you what I wrote in that paper. In my presentation today, I'm going to explain what differentiated instruction is and talk about how it can benefit many students that you typically teach. And let me start by talking a little bit about how it can be beneficial. Students tend to comprehend little and lose focus of classroom instruction when their teachers fail to use instructional strategies that match their learning styles. And that's why I showed you that video. It appeared as though that instructor wasn't using learning styles or an approach of teaching that matched the learning styles of the students. Teachers who are unaware of student learning styles will likely teach in a manner that prevents pupils from doing their best work. And the reason differentiated instruction is important is that it can alleviate the problem that we just saw with students not being engaged. As I mentioned, I was going to explain what differentiated instruction is, and I'm going to do that right now. Differentiated instruction is a way of recognizing and teaching according to different talents and learning styles. This form of teaching is designed to meet the needs of diverse learners and emphasizes student responsibility, peer tutoring, flexible grouping, and student choice. More importantly, this approach involves modifying instruction so that all pupils can be successful. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the theories that differentiated instruction is based on. One of the leading theorists on differentiated instruction is Harvard University professor Howard Gardner, who did a tremendous amount of work and is the leading authority on multiple intelligences. In 1983, Dr. Gardner wrote a book called Frames of Mind, in which he identified 7 intelligences and then added another one. And I have them listed for you here. They are the logical mathematical, verbal linguistic, musical, visual spatial, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, and intrapersonal. And as I mentioned later, he added another one which he called the naturalist intelligence. Unfortunately, today, too many instructors only rely on 2 intelligences, and they are the verbal linguistic and the mathematical intelligence. Think about the standardized tests that that teachers in K through 12 schools give students. They drill them year long, and they have to take tests which usually only measure their mathematical and their verbal abilities. Think about the tests that you and I had to take to enter college, the SAT, the GRE. We were measured according to our verbal and our mathematical ability, and none of the other intelligences seem to be on that test. And these intelligences can be very, very important. Think about the interpersonal intelligence, for example, getting along with others. If somebody has very poor interpersonal intelligence, that person will likely have difficulty getting a job or being successful at their position. So these other intelligences can be equally important, and unfortunately, in instruction, teachers very often neglect them. And this is one reason Howard Gardner gained a great deal of respect for developing these intelligences. I already mentioned some reasons why differentiated instruction is important, and I'd like to mention some more. Very often when we only use two intelligences, we don't reach many students. So, for example, students usually rely on their strongest intelligence when completing a task, and if they are not strong in the verbal or mathematical intelligence, chances are that they're going to have a great deal of difficulty if teachers only use these intelligences. So when we use the different intelligences, we often make content easier for many students, because if they don't see it one way, they can rely on the other intelligences to make content easier for them. Differentiated instruction is also based on Vygotsky's theory of which is called the zone of proximal development. According to the zone of proximal development, teachers need to teach at a level in which instruction is stimulating. If instruction is too easy or too difficult, chances are it's going to lead to problems for many students, and that was probably what was going on in the video that we saw. According to the zone of proximal development, instruction needs to be stimulating. It needs to be difficult enough so that students accomplish it, but not so difficult that it frustrates them. Brain research supports differentiated instruction. There was a very good article published in 2001 in a journal called the Kappa Delta Phi Record, which talked about the hormone noradrenaline. And the article mentioned that if instruction is too easy or too difficult, students are going to release either too much or too little noradrenaline, and that's going to lead to some of the problems which we saw in the videotape. And now I'd like to offer some practical strategies that you can use to differentiate instruction in your courses by referring to one of the leading researchers on differentiated instruction, Carol Ann Tomlinson, who wrote numerous articles and books. Tomlinson mentions that differentiated instruction is especially beneficial to students who don't fit the mold. And she wrote a recent paper in a journal called Educational Leadership in which she emphasized 3 ways to differentiate instruction to reach these 3 students who often have difficulty in class. And they are emphasizing student interest, using the right starting point, and allowing students to work at their own pace. And I'd also like to share some strategies that I use myself to emphasize student interest. What I do every semester during my very first course is I ask students to interview one of their peers, and I ask them to find out any information they would like, and then to do a report on the student who they interviewed. But they are required to find out one thing. What is it that that student wants to get out of my class? What can I do to make my class interesting? What can I do to make it motivating? What can I do to make it fun, engaging, practical? What can I do in order to not make it feel like a drag? And after one student has interviewed the other, they do a little report. And I sit down and I take notes on what they want to get out of my class. And then throughout the semester, I try to do whatever they tell me. And now let me refer to some case studies that appeared in Carol Tomlinson's paper. I'd like to talk a little bit about other ways to emphasize student interest. Another strategy that teachers can use is to use independent study. To allow students choice to pursue their own interest is an excellent way to emphasize student interest according to the method that I refer to. Using the right starting point. In Tomlinson's paper, she talks about a 15-year-old who couldn't read. And she talks about how the teacher in this case had to teach in a completely different manner in order for that student to benefit the most out of the class. The other students were writing short stories and identifying conjunctions and prepositions. And for this particular student, the teacher had to do something completely different because that particular instruction didn't fit the child's academic ability. So in this case, the teacher had to learn effective methods of teaching reading, and that is one way to use the right starting point. And finally, the third method she calls allowing students to work at their own pace. As I mentioned earlier, everybody in a given class is at a different academic level. Some students are behind, some students are ahead. And for students who are ahead, if they do work that is not challenging for them, that's going to be equally problematic. So we have to allow students to pursue work that matches that academic level. And once again, independent study can be a very good method to use because students get to explore things that interest them and things that match their academic level. In conclusion, differentiated and personalized instruction seem to be more important today than ever before because our country is much more diverse than ever before. And not only that, but it's going to continue to get more diverse. So 50 years from now, our country is projected to become more diverse than it is today. Since classrooms today tend to consist of students who vary greatly in academic skills, teachers need to teach at a level that matches student skills and learning styles. And that concludes my presentation. So next